Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Philip Marris, CEO of Marris Consulting, and I have the honor and pleasure of having Efrat Goldratt-Ashlag with me today. And we're going to be discussing her book, Goldratt's Rules of Flow. But before we get to that, for those who might not know, Efrat started writing a book when she co-authored with her father The Choice. Okay, I won't go into any of the details of all this book and the rest now. She will later on describe her history and what these different events meant. And there's another book, which, by the way, I don't think people realize to which extent Efrat was the key actor, the spark that did it all. And it's also one of my favorites because it's the graphic version of The Goal, right? So for those that don't know, it's The Goal, except instead of taking about 5 hours to read, it's only about an hour and a quarter because it's, pictures and a graphic version. It's been modernized so that, what's the wife's name? Julie, is it?
Julie.
Yeah, is not a stay-at-home mother, but has a job and all these sorts of things. Anyways, it's all been fantastically updated, really good. And so she was the instigator of this fantastic thing. And then she's going to tell you all about that. She published this little thing, right? And in fact, we did the Goldratt's Rules of Flow. We did a webinar when this was published in its original American version. Okay, that was 2 years ago in January 2023, something like that, or February, beginning of February. And it's gone on to be a fantastic success. I'm very proud to have also, and I'll keep it for life, this thing, which is the uncorrected proof edition before it was published. Really, really nice. So then it's been published. It's been published in many languages, and 4 days ago, or 3 days ago, it was published in French. So now you can buy Les règles du flux de Goldratt, les principes du but appliqués au projet, which is what we're talking about. And for those who don't know me and why Philip Marris lives in Paris, that's the view from my office. And I am bilingual French-English. So that's why les règles du flux is so important for me, right? Because we'll be recommending this to everyone in France, all 60 million of them. They have to read it, right? Anyway, those are those first books, and we'll be talking about other stuff that's come out. I'll hand over to Efrat about that. But can I just go mention one thing just to get you really excited? All this started because of this thing. This is the original copy of the first edition of a book called The Goal, which is now, I don't know how many million, over 10 million, over 11 million copies.
Oh,
yeah.
For sure.
In 32, 33 languages.
40.
And I had the pleasure and honor of starting my journey in the theory of constraints back then. This is the original French edition, way back. Still Afnor Gestion, still the same editor. And then it went on and on and on, right? I don't have the one which says 10 million copies sold, unfortunately. This is the one that's about 4 years old, and it says only 6 million copies. Anyway, that book is fantastic success even so many years later. And the second best-selling theory of constraints book in the world today is The Rules of Flow by Efrat. So we're really talking about a very important literary event and a big step in the theory of constraints in the domain of project management. So having said all that, a slightly longer introduction than was expected, I'm going to hand over to Efrat, who can present herself.
Thank you, Philip. It is a true pleasure to join you here today. So as you said, I am my father's daughter. I am an organizational psychologist on my own. My PhD is in organizational psychology in the subject of employees' reactions to organizational change. But I have been helping my father with his publications, with his books for many years now. Not when The Goal was published, I was still a kid then, but since his second business novel, I was part of his inner circle, assisting him in his writing. And as you said, I had the absolute pleasure to spend one of the best years of my life helping him write his life philosophy book, The Choice. Going back to The Goal, which you showed the original version, The Goal was published in 1984, but it really took off in the 90s. Early 90s, it reaches the 1 million copies sold and everything takes off. Multiple translations, million of more copies sold. But at that time, my father was very busy with his new research, which was the field of project management. He noticed in the field of project management that people kept complaining about the same things no matter where in the world he went and no matter what field of project he was discussing. It was always the same complaints. Projects are late, they're over budget, and they underpromise because they end up compromising on some of the original scope just in order to finish the project. Talking to people, looking into it, everyone said the same thing. There is not much that we can do about it because things just happen, things pop. There is a lot of uncertainty in projects, and there's not much that we can do with the uncertainty. Projects are not like production, they're not as predictable. You and I know from production that production is not very predictable, not always, but let it go for now. Project has a lot more uncertainty, this is correct. And because of it, he started to see, okay, we cannot reduce the uncertainty. Maybe we can with better planning. He went and researched critical chain. And then he came up with a method to manage the uncertainty that we know will come up. And he started developing what we call the buffer management. The mid-90s, he starts to realize that the theory of constraints receives a brand recognition worldwide as a production theory. But he was already looking into the fields of project management, of supply chain, of logistics, of distribution, of many others. And he wanted the theory of constraints to be known as a management theory, not a production theory. To do that, he said, I need to come up with another bestseller, and the sooner the better. And the next book that he decided to write was about project management, just because projects are everywhere. He started to write critical chain and concentrated on his development, which are planning according to the critical chain and buffer management. But it took him a lot longer to write this book because he was so busy with so many implementations around the world. And as he was auditing these implementations, something astonishing was revealed. It's not always about uncertainty. Actually, more often than none, the reasons that cause us significant delays in projects has nothing to do with uncertainty. These are things that we are fully aware of. These are things that we do on intention sometimes. These are things that we sometimes believe we are doing the right thing. We are unaware of their ramification and how much they are harmful. He started to investigate the obstacles to flow on projects. Now starts the question, okay, so what am I doing with that book? I started writing critical chain and he needs it urgently because of the brand recognition of the theory of constraint. What he said at that time was the following. He said, listen, I have to publish another book and buffer management is important enough and valuable enough to be out there in the market. This is why I will publish critical chain as soon as possible, but I will continue to research the obstacles to flow. And when I figure out the holistic approach, the TOC holistic approach to project management, I will, in the due time, publish another book or rewrite critical chain to introduce the whole solution. And this is what happened. Critical Chain was published in 1997, and my father continued to investigate the obstacles to flow. The first one he even put in Critical Chain. He talked about multitasking, but there was a lot more to it. There was no question about it. Before I go on to talk about what happened next, I want to take a minute to give an example. What do I mean by obstacles to flow? What do I mean when I'm saying these are things that we are aware of but are so harmful? I want to give you an example, Philip, of a TOC implementation in a large hospital a few years back. We go into the hospital. Of course, step number one is identify the constraint. And in that hospital, there was no question about it. The obstacle was the operating rooms. Even though they had 10 operating rooms, it was very evident that was the resource with the least capacity relative to the demand. They had to do something about it because that was the money generator for the hospital. I don't care if the money comes from the government or the health insurance or from individuals. As far as the hospital as an organization, the operating rooms were what was generating most of the money, and that was the constraint. So it had to be dealt with. Now, people may think intuitively that when we're talking about, okay, so this is the constraint, the resource with the most limited capacity, that means we have to invest more money to get more of the constraint. We are not talking about a huge investment to open another operating room, not when TOC is concerned. Definitely not as a first step. What we are doing is we're looking, as you very well know, we are looking for ways to exploit the constraint and get a lot more capacity with the existing resources. We did the research, and what was very clear was that a lot of time was wasted after one surgery ended before they got ready to the next surgery. Sometimes they had to wait for a long time until the cleaning crew came to clean the surgery. And I'm sure most of you who are a little bit familiar with the health arena know how messy operating rooms can become after a surgery. And there is a need not only to clean it, but to sterilize it before the next surgery starts. So what they did, as part of exploiting the constraints and getting a lot more capacity from the operating rooms, they put a bench, a special bench in the corridor where the 10 operating rooms were, and they made sure that in every shift, 2 cleaning people were sitting on this bench. As soon as an operating room was done with one surgery, these cleaning crew came in, started to clean, make sure that the time was as short as possible to make sure that the next operation can start as soon as possible. That was the case for a few years, and they were very, very good at sustainability and making sure that this is the policy forever. No one was allowed to sit on that bench, but the cleaning room. A few years later, a new maintenance manager was appointed. He came in with all the motivation to improve processes, to reduce costs, to reduce waste, and to show that he has value. And one of the things that he immediately noticed was these 2 people sitting on that bench all day made no sense to him whatsoever. He can reduce expenses. And he just said, listen, these 2, come back to the pool of cleaning people. And he contacted the administrator in charge of the operating rooms, and he told them, listen, mister, with all the respect and love to the operating room, you might as well stand in line with everyone else. When you need a cleaning room, give me a call. I will put you in line for the next available cleaning room, and they will come and they clean the operating room. Can you imagine, Philip? Can you imagine how many hours were lost on the constraint? For the sake of the local optimum of saving cost for the maintenance department, the entire hospital was bleeding money, was losing so much money for hours every day. This is the obstacle to flow that my father called local optimum versus global optimum. Or in detail, the obstacle is preferring local optimum to global optimum. A major obstacle to flow that happens in various occasions in many organizations and is costing us a lot. The rule of flow that we should implement is, of course, preferring the global optimum over the local optimum. But instead of going into the details of this particular obstacle to flow, maybe you have another example for us of another obstacle to flow?
Yes, I'll give examples from industry or industries, and it's to do with full kit, complet conforme, since we've got some French speakers among us normally, making sure that you have everything required for a given task before you start it, and refusing to start it without having everything you need. And we discussed this with Efrat many times because it sounds obvious, it sounds like evident common sense. A lot of people think they're already practicing it, and yet I I've been doing it for so long, and every single time it doubles the performance and I'll just give you some examples. So my first case, just to show you my age, is from 1995 in Lyon, France, a company that makes machines that make cardboard boxes, right? It cuts the cardboard and folds them up and whatever. The world leader, Bobst, right? And they designed them, they got all the parts, and then they had to assemble the machines, right? These are fairly complicated machines with a couple of thousand parts. And when I arrived, they said that their bottleneck, their constraint was the assembly department, the assembly hall or halls. Okay, they were going to expand the buildings and stuff because they didn't have enough room to assemble their machines. And I looked around. Very quickly, it became evident that not many of these machines were actually being worked on. And when you asked them why you're not working on that machine, it was because they're missing that part or this, and soon that's going to arrive or whatever, right? So we implemented strict full kit. You are not allowed to start the assembly of a machine until you have absolutely everything to do the assembly. Okay, and we did that, and this had fantastic impact on the lead times divided by 4. Right, it went from 8 weeks to 2 weeks. The productivity more than doubled because everybody was a lot more efficient, and also security, the health and safety issues were much better, 10 times better, because they were doing dangerous things like adding a bit under the machine when it arrived and all this sort of stuff, rather than applying standards and obvious rules of assembly. So that was 30 years ago in Lyon, France, and I've done this, I've stopped counting, but probably well over 100 times. And the last one was just again in central France, in another kind of assembly of machines, and the same kind of results from 9 weeks to 2 weeks and so forth. So if you think you're doing it, how come I go from one company to another and tell them, you're not actually really doing it, you're cheating. It's a bit like, you cheat a little bit and then a little bit more, and 6 months later it's chaos. Right, so make sure you're really applying it, because it's only when you really apply it that you get the full power of it. And of course, you don't stop there, right? You start thinking of, why did I have shortages? So your problem resolution goes upstream to the root causes, and it gets much better, much more good results. And it's not just industry, as in nuts and bolts and assembling things, right? Let me give you one from a different kind of business. These people implement ERP systems like SAP, PeopleSoft, and whatever, right? They implement them. This is a large firm doing it in France. And to implement their software, they ensure that their clients have the full kit. That's to say that they're properly prepared, so that when the teams arrive to install, they have the information, they have the data, they've cleaned it up, they know what they want, and so forth. And so very quickly, the work can be done. And again, this divides by lead times by 2 or by 4, simply by being more rigorous. And it has fantastic impact on the quality of the work, right? Because if you do it right first time, and you get many fewer problems, right? So that's another case. And I could go on and on, right? We work a lot in aircraft maintenance, Air France, Embraer, all these other, or the French Air Force, and making sure that the mechanics, when they go to the plane, they have the tooling, they have the instructions, they have the spare part, they have whatever, and that makes it 2 times or 4 times more efficient. Okay, so I could go on a long time with these sorts of things, and that's just one of the rules. Full kit. Make sure you have everything before you start an operation, and you'll see that everything not only goes faster, but it gets multi-dimensional improvement. Right. So that's my story on that, and maybe now we can discuss briefly what's been happening since the publication of your book, since the last 2 years.
Just before that,
yeah,
I'm really happy that you chose to talk about full kit, because it's one of the prominent obstacles to flow. People honestly believe that it's much more important to start as early as possible, and things will arrive in due time, and hopefully everything will come together. But as soon as we start, it increases our chances of continuing. This is what people assume. So for the right reasons of wanting to be on time, because they start without a full kit, they end up causing a lot of delay and a lot of stoppages that are unnecessary in mid-project.
Yes, the earlier.
Go ahead, sorry.
Right. The later you start, the earlier you will finish.
If you have a full kit.
Yep.
Yes. So I think those 2 examples, my example about putting local optimum versus global optimum and your example about lack of full kit are two very common obstacles to flow, but you and I actually had a little bit of an issue which obstacle to flow to choose to discuss from, because there is a whole list of them.
Yeah.
The idea is not to provide people with a list of rules of flow. First of all, because it's not necessary. And second of all, because a lot of the obstacles to flow are very organizational specific. The whole point in writing the book was, for me, and I'm sure for my father also, was to develop people's intuition to flow. So in the minimum amount of time, and this is a very short book, in the minimum amount of time, they will be able to identify the obstacles to flow that are prominent, that are causing the delays in their environment, and apply the appropriate rules of flow to overcome them. My father investigated years talking about multitasking and full kit and local optimum and another rules of flow. And around the time that we were completing the choice, he told me, after Isn't It Obvious, the next book is going to be the book about project management. And I was so happy about it, because no matter where I go, where I'm talking about individuals or whether I'm talking about organizations, projects suffer from these things. And this is such a valuable information that makes no sense that only my father's close circle will be familiar with. So I was very happy to hear that that was going to be the next book. And the next thing that happened was that my father passed away. And you know, Philip, how quickly that whole thing unfolded, and it left us devastated. But it also left us without the next book. And after I spent 10 years looking for the right person to write that book, finally one day I looked in the mirror and I said, okay, Efrat, there is no way around it. It should be you. You know how my father used to write. You, or shall I say me, I know his writing style. I have helped him to write for so many years. I know what he wanted to convey in this book. And more importantly, I know what his goal was. The goal is to develop people's intuition to flow so they can improve rather easily their own flow in their organization. So coming COVID, I spent a year writing this book, and now 2 years after it's published, I'm proud to show the American and the British editions. January of 2023, that you said, the Latin American Spanish edition, which I'm very proud of, the Castilian Spanish edition. I have a very special one here, Hebrew. That was a special gift to my mother.
The one reader.
But I also have, I also have here the Russian edition, the Lithuanian edition, the Dutch edition. I just got back from the launch of this edition. We had 400 people in the audience. That was amazing. So I am overwhelmed how well that book is accepted and waited for in the world. People have a lot of trouble in projects. We have tried to solve this problem in the 80s, in the 90s, in the 2000s, in 2010s, and it still exists to that magnitude. So why don't we look in the mirror and say, okay, we tried everything else. Let's try common sense. Let's figure out the flow, apply the appropriate rules of flow, and get things done.
Great, great, great. Thank you. Your point about intuition, maybe you'd like to, I know you said it in the previous webinar, but I think it's fundamental for people to understand what you're trying to do with the rules of flow. There's a list, there's 8 of them and stuff. It doesn't mean you have, the idea behind intuition is that everyone has to try and work out which are the relevant rules are and how to apply them, right? It's not a cookbook which says this is how to solve your project problems, right? It's
not at all. Not
right.
at all. And you know, the list of rules of flow that I put in the end, I absolutely refused to number them.
Yep.
Because it's not about having an 8 rules of flow or a 7 rules of flow. It is about developing the intuition to flow and what constitutes as the obstacles to your flow, so you can implement the appropriate rules of flow in your environment and get things done. So basically what happens is, what I'm finding out is that each organization that is adopting that approach puts together their own list of rules of flow to follow, so people can get consensus around their own list of rules of flow and get things done. And I think you have it right next to you, the APM edition.
Absolutely. So here it is. If I set it up right, here we are. Right.
Yes. So this is an amazing project done in collaboration with APM and people from BAE, the British Aerospace Enterprises. And when I opened that book, I was surprised but very happy to see a completely different list of rules of flow. Because what they did in BAE is they thoroughly studied CCPM, critical chain, the rules of flow, all the other TOC material that is relevant to making sure that projects are well completed and on time. And they constructed their own list of rules of flow, and this is what they offer to publish at the APM. And I can see more and more of these lists of rules of flow appearing as more and more organizations are fully implementing this approach. And I think it's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's really cool, and you're absolutely right. And so I hope people won't misinterpret the fact that there are. Apparently, I shouldn't say how many, but there are 8 in the book, right? They're not numbered, but anyway, and that might, for some people, might be a bit overwhelming. That means quite a long list. And I know that with quite a few of my customers, they prefer just to put 3 or 4, maybe maximum 5 of them on post.
Most.
Yeah.
I'm very happy that you say it, because most of the time what we found worldwide is that people do not need the entire list of rules of flow, which, by the way, is more than 15 rules. I chose 8. You know why? Because
No.
I decided that my book will be, the publisher requested less than 200 pages. They said people don't have patience to read books anymore. If we want it to be well adopted by managers who don't have time, don't have patience, make sure that it's less than 200 pages. Now, you know me, I was brought up with buffer management in my veins. So if someone is telling me 200 pages, I'm shooting for 170, and the other 30 are a buffer, a pages buffer.
Yeah.
So the English edition, the original edition, was published with 171 pages. I took 1 page from the buffer, and that space allowed me to introduce 7 or 8 obstacles to flow. And this is where I stopped. It is not about many very important and very frequent obstacles to flow, like segregation, like FOMO, like others. They never made it into the book, which is okay. People will figure them out, and if not, in severe cases, they have you in France, they have TOC people in every single country these days. Absolutely. To help them figure it out, get started, and then they can continue on their own, and there is no problem about it. The only thing is they need intuition to flow. They need to understand the approach. That was the importance, and hence the short book, and hence the list of 7 to 8 obstacles. I welcome people to read the book. I welcome people to implement it. And please, please, once you implement it, send us feedback, send us documentaries, send us the case studies, because what we find out, and I'm sure you also, in my presentations around the world, I just got back from the Netherlands, but I also had conferences around the world, using live examples and how people actually implemented those rules of flow in live situations is tremendously helpful in getting other people's intuition and other people's spark of, yeah, now I get it, now I can go on and implement it in my environment. So help me out.
If I can just confirm what you just said, how important that is, because it's and you said it earlier on, we're addressing a gigantic universe of project management, right? There's so many different kinds of projects in the world, between a big mega project of building an airport or whatever, or a huge mega factory, to much more simple stuff, right? Where it's and in all cases these rules apply, but it's not obviously going to be the same solution. So it's good for everybody to supply these examples, because otherwise people are likely to fall into the the regrettable trap of saying, I'm special, we're different, we have this, we have that. And you and I know from having done it a long time that behind those specific particularities of a given client, there's some fundamental issues that are reoccurring, right? For instance,
Absolutely.
they depend on suppliers, they depend on partners, they whatever. So these are things that you find in different environments, and solutions can be adapted. Anyway, so that's really good. And I'm glad, I liked a lot what you just said about making it to 171 pages, right? This thing, because it's really important, I think, because you and I know are very we think very important books are very important to us, right? I mean, I can't see my library from this camera, but books are very important to me. I've learned a lot with books, and you think books are very important, and you're making a real effort to make sure that in today's world there's a format like this which gives the thing, and that allows me to go back to what I mentioned earlier on, which I think one of the other maybe underrated books is the graphic version of the goal, which you were instrumental in getting to the publisher.
Absolutely.
And it's fantastic. It's a fantastic job, right? And unfortunately, not that well known. It gets around once again the constraint of a paper book which takes 5 hours to read is not going to be as successful today as it was when it was published, right? Unfortunately. Anyway, so that's that. And so for my conclusion, what can I say? I'm just very, very pleased once again to have you in this webinar and listening to everything that's happening. And so it's very exciting to know how much is going on. You brought a big breath of fresh air and boosting dynamism into the project aspect of what Eli Goldratt launched in 1997, right? A long, long time ago, but it's very active, as you know, at the moment,
yes,
in all kinds of environments, and that's really nice. Okay, let's get to the questions and answer session then. I have already a question which goes back to your example of the hospital environment, okay? Which is what will be the constraint if the bed is not available in the hospital? Even if the hospital is a global and has a large capacity, so a big hospital, but a problem of beds maybe?
Well, it's very specific, and we will have to dive into the circumstances of that specific hospital in order to give a reliable answer. But I can tell you for a fact that other hospitals that we dove in, and the initial assumption was that the beds were the constraint in the internal departments, etc. Actually, when we went to exploit the constraint, we found a tremendous amount of excess capacity. One of the things that I can recall from a certain hospital, a different one than the one I talked about before, was that what they found out was that sometimes people were staying in the ward, in the hospital, for days and sometimes for weeks after their medical situation was resolved, because only when the time came to release them, the social worker was notified to look for an alternative place for them in an elderly home or a rehabilitation center. And sometimes it took weeks to find the next one. And this week was a week's worth of bed. So it's just an example, but what I'm saying is, if we think flow, if we think constraints, if we are familiar with that intuition, with that approach, there is always a lot of capacity that is hidden, and we need to be able to identify it and to exploit it.
From my experience of hospitals and operating rooms, it's exactly what you described. The number one, firstly, there are exceptions, but it is often the constraint in the system. The point that you've already mentioned about how the cleaning is important is fundamental, because it's often nearly 50% of the availability of an operating room is cleaning it. It's a lot easier to get it dirty than to get it clean, isn't it? I won't go into the details for those who've never worked in an operating room, but blood splatters all over the place, and it takes a long, lot of time to clean up afterwards. Anyway, so that's one of them, and also what we've described, the other rules of flow, the full kit and whatever, making sure that all these things will improve that performance. I had the dubious pleasure of working on the person and the organization that have the world record for the speed of replacing hips at 17 minutes, and they're fully involved in the theory constraints and what the competencies are that choose the right constraint and all these sorts of things. So anyway, yeah, that's good. And don't hesitate to type some more questions. I'll go to the next one. The next one is completely different. Do you know what the best-selling books are after the goal in the theory of constraints?
Well, historically, it is Critical Chain.
Yeah.
But in the past 2 years, number 2 is Goldratt Rules of Flow.
Wow. Isn't that incredible? Yeah, isn't that incredible? What a thought. Well done. And congratulations. And, you know, I hadn't realized that until we were setting this up. But that's really very, very impressive because, and it's, you know, it's strange because I didn't realize we're now doing half our work in Marris Consulting is project management now. And probably one of the key contributors or the explanations of that is because I discovered a long, long time ago what was initially critical chain and more recently the rules of flow and stuff. So it's yeah, it's very important.
I can tell you that I was amazed how many people knew that my father was working on additional material but didn't know what it was about, because when the original book was in print, my publisher explained to me that in order to set everything correctly on Amazon, she would like to offer the book for pre-order a month before it was actually in print. And what happened was that during this month, the entire first print was sold on pre-order, and we went to second print before the book was available.
Crazy.
So that was, to me, that was amazing. It means there is a need for that knowledge out there.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as you know, I read a lot of the theory constraints books, but I also look at what's being said in other schools of thought on various subjects. And what I can say, which I think explains a lot the success that you've had, is that it's a very fresh and different way of looking at the subject, what you've written, compared to what one would find in other project management books, right? So it's a really an interesting breath of fresh air, and all the results that are coming out on all these examples just show, you know, how pertinent it was to have this.
That's the important point.
Yeah, you use the word, and as you know, your father had very deep thoughts about that. It's only common sense, isn't it? Yeah. And that other remark, which is, yes, but common sense is not that common. Yes. So it's that's really good. Anyway, we have
You shouldn't be looking for complicated solutions. Projects are complicated enough as they are. The solutions must be simple.
Yeah. Let's go for the last question here, which is from Roger. Do you ever do just in time with full kit? You don't have something you need, but you know it will arrive tomorrow and you won't need it until tomorrow. Do you start immediately or wait until tomorrow? I'll let you answer that, then I will answer it also because I want to insist.
Well, why don't you go first? For sure.
Okay, you wait until tomorrow. You never cheat. You wait until you actually have it in hand, right? Because as soon as you start cheating and saying it's going to arrive tomorrow, somebody promised it tomorrow and whatever, things fall apart. Okay, so full kit it might sound stupid and bestial and simplistic, but you make sure you actually have it in hand and you're not depending on promises from the environment before you get started. Okay, so no, you do not start, even if you've been promised that the part will arrive tomorrow, the thing that is missing will arrive tomorrow. You wait until you have absolutely everything in your hands.
And the key is to use the principle of T minus preparation.
Yeah.
You know the T, you know the time when you need to start working on the project. Calculate T minus preparation and start working on the full kit enough time in advance so everything is ready, and as soon as you start to work, there are not going to be any more delays. You're just going to finish and complete the project or this part of the project without delays.
Absolutely. It's just for you and me, it's just obvious buffer management, but it's important when you're setting up rules such as that one to realize that it's not just bestially having this rule which says you sit there and wait. No, you have to prepare that full kit. To prepare that full kit, you start working on the full kit weeks before to make sure that when you need it, it's there, right?
Sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's hours, sometimes it's years. It's highly dependent on the project, but you need to calculate T minus preparation and start on time.
Yeah, no, it's it could be a webinar on its own, because obviously one of the difficulties is that what we're talking about, which makes common sense in discussions here, it's sometimes quite difficult to explain to one's ERP system, for example, and to get it properly automated. But anyway, so that's it. We've done the timing as expected. I want to finish on time since we're all talking about projects and stuff. So we're going to finish off here. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to speak to you again and to hear everything that's going on.
Thank you, Philip.
What can I say? To have made such an impact in just 2 years on such an important subject such as projects in the world is fantastic. And so congratulations.
Best of luck with the French edition.
Oh yeah, no, now I'm going to be forcing it down everybody. There are 60 million French people. I have to sell 60 million copies, right? Okay, so thank you everyone. Take care, and maybe we'll meet up again for when we celebrate, I don't know, 10 million copies of Rules of Flow. Yeah.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.